When night cleaner Zora Bennett accidentally crosses paths with billionaire gym mogul Dorian Vance, an unlikely connection sparks. But with family secrets and a community's fate at stake, will love survive the coming storm? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The alarm on Zora Bennett's phone buzzed for the third time. She groaned, sliding her finger across the screen to silence it. It was 9:30 p.m. and her night shift at Elysium Fitness was about to start in 30 minutes. The exclusive gym catered to Manhattan's elite, those who could afford the astronomical membership fees that kept ordinary people like her far away, except, of course, for the cleaning staff. "Marcus," she called out, tying her curly hair back into a tight bun. "Did you eat something? I left pasta in the fridge." Her 19-year-old brother appeared in the doorway of their small apartment kitchen, laptop tucked under his arm. "Already had. Some. You heading out?" Zora nodded, grabbing her backpack. At 25, she carried the weight of responsibilities most people her age couldn't imagine. 2 cleaning jobs, an apartment in a neighborhood that was barely affordable, and her brother's college tuition hanging over her head like a storm cloud that refused to pass. "Don't stay up all night studying," she warned, knowing he would anyway. "And call me if you need anything." Marcus rolled his eyes but smiled. "I'm not a kid anymore, Zoe." "You'll always be my kid brother," she replied, checking to make sure she had her keys and bus pass. Their father had walked out when Marcus was just 14, leaving Zora to pick up the pieces. She'd put her own dreams of college on hold, taking whatever jobs she could find to keep them afloat. Now, with Marcus in his second year of engineering, school every dollar mattered more than ever. The bus ride to the Upper East Side took 40 minutes. Zora used the time to close her eyes, letting the gentle rocking motion of the vehicle soothe her tired body. Her day job cleaning offices downtown had been particularly demanding today. Some executive had spilled coffee all over the conference room just before a big meeting, and Zora had been called in to deal with the mess. By the time she arrived at Elysium Fitness, it was 9:55 p.m. The gym officially closed at 10, but the cleaning staff had key cards that allowed them access after hours. Zora had been cleaning the gym for nearly 6 months now, but she'd never once seen its famous owner, Dorian Vance. The 30-year-old fitness mogul was a regular in business magazines and social media. His chain of luxury gyms had made him a billionaire before his 30th birthday. In interviews, he came across as cold and calculating, a man whose perfect physique was matched only by his perfect business record. Just as Zora was about to slide her keycard, her phone rang. She recognized Marcus's ringtone immediately and felt her heart skip a beat. He never called unless it was important. "Marcus? What's wrong?" she asked, her voice tense. "Zoe, I'm at the emergency room," he said, his voice shaky. "Don't freak out. I'm okay, just a bad asthma attack. They're giving me a breathing treatment." Zora's stomach dropped. "Which hospital? I'm coming right now." "No, don't," Marcus insisted. "They're already treating me. I just didn't want you to come home and panic when I wasn't there. I'll probably be discharged in an hour or 2. "Are you sure?" Zora asked, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to lose this job, but Marcus was everything to her. "Positive. The worst is over. I'll text you when I'm heading home." Reluctantly, Zora agreed to stay at work, making Marcus promise to call if anything changed. By the time the call ended, it was already 10:15 p.m. She hurried into the building, hoping none of the management staff was still around to notice her tardiness. The gym's lobby was dimly lit, with only the security lights providing illumination. Zora quickly made her way to the staff room to change into her uniform, a plain grey polo shirt with the gym's logo and black pants. She gathered her cleaning supplies and began her usual routine, starting with the locker rooms. As she worked, her mind kept wandering to Marcus. His asthma hadn't acted up in years. Was he pushing himself too hard with school? Was the stress getting to him? Maybe she should pick up a third job, just to ease the financial pressure. Lost in her thoughts, Zora didn't realize she deviated from her usual cleaning route. Normally, she saved the main weight room for last, but tonight, she found herself pushing open its heavy glass door well ahead of schedule. The sound of heavy breathing stopped her cold. Someone was there. Zora froze, clutching her cleaning cart like a shield. The gym was supposed to be empty. Even the late-night security guard only patrolled the perimeter, not the interior. A figure was bent over one of the weight benches, back turned to her. Oh man! His broad shoulders heaved with each breath, muscles rippling under skin that gleamed with sweat. He wore nothing but a white towel wrapped low around his waist. Zora's first instinct was to back away quietly before he noticed her. But then the man straightened up and turned, and she found herself staring into the face she'd seen countless times on magazine covers and billboards. Dorian Vance. Up close, he looked different than in his carefully staged photos. His jaw was still sharp enough to cut glass, and his body was every bit as impressive as the fitness empire he'd built suggested. But there was something raw in his expression, something vulnerable that the cameras never captured. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Zora felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Vance," she stammered, taking a step back. "I didn't realize anyone was in here. I'll come back later." She expected him to be angry or dismissive. Instead, he just looked tired. "You're the night cleaner?" he asked, his voice deeper than she'd imagined. Zora nodded, unable to find her voice. This was the man who signed her paychecks, who could fire her with a single word. To her surprise, Dorian didn't order her to leave. Instead, he sank down onto the bench, running a hand through his dark hair. "You're here late," he observed. "We close at 10. "I know. I'm sorry. My brother had an emergency and I got held up." The words tumbled out before Zora could stop them. "It won't happen again." Dorian studied her for a long moment. Up close, his eyes were a piercing blue that seemed to cut right through her. "Your brother?" he repeated. "Is he all right?" The question caught Zora off guard. She hadn't expected concern from the notoriously cold businessman. "He will be," she said cautiously. "Asthma attack. He's in college and I think he's pushing himself too hard." Dorian nodded slowly, as if absorbing this information. "College is stressful. I remember those days." An awkward silence fell between them. Zora shifted her weight from one foot to the other, unsure if she should leave or wait to be dismissed. "You probably wonder why I'm here so late," Dorian said finally, gesturing to the empty gym around them. Zora hesitated. "It's your gym, Mr. Vance. You can be here whenever you want." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "True, but most people assume I have a private gym in my penthouse, which I do. So why come here?" The question slipped out before Zora could stop it, and she immediately regretted her boldness. But Dorian didn't seem offended. Instead, he looked around the room, his expression distant. "I can't sleep anymore unless I exhaust myself first," he admitted, the words coming out like a confession. "And here, late at night, there's no one watching. No expectations, no cameras." Something in his tone made Zora's heart twist unexpectedly. She recognized the weight of sleepless nights, of carrying burdens that felt too heavy to bear. "Here," she said, reaching into her cart and pulling out a fresh towel. She handed it to him, careful not to let their fingers touch. "You're dripping on my clean floor." The blunt comment surprised a genuine laugh out of Dorian, a sound that transformed his face completely. "Can't have that, can we?" he said, accepting the towel and dabbing at his face. "What's your name?" "Zora. Zora Bennett." "Well, Zora Bennett. I apologize for disrupting your cleaning schedule." He stood up, and Zora had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "I should hit the showers and let you get back to work." Zora nodded, relief washing over her. This encounter could have gone much worse. As Dorian moved past her toward the door, he paused. "Your brother, what's he studying?" "Engineering," Zora answered, a note of pride creeping into her voice despite her nervousness. "He's brilliant. Got a partial scholarship, but college is expensive," Dorian finished for her. "Even with scholarships." Zora just nodded, unwilling to discuss her financial struggles with her boss. "Well, good night, Miss Bennett," Dorian said, heading toward the locker room. "I hope your brother feels better soon." "Thank you, Mr. Vance," she replied, watching him go. Only after the door closed behind him did Zora release the breath she'd been holding. Her heart was racing, though she couldn't quite explain why. It was just the shock of meeting her employer so unexpectedly, she told herself. Nothing more. She turned back to her cleaning cart, trying to refocus on her job. But the image of Dorian Vance, not the polished businessman from magazine covers, but the exhausted man with haunted eyes, lingered in her mind. For the next week, Zora adjusted her cleaning schedule to avoid the weight room until much later in her shift. She didn't want another awkward encounter with Dorian Vance, but each night, as she finally made her way to clean the area, she found it already immaculate, as if someone had cleaned it thoroughly before her arrival. On Friday night, a text from Marcus derailed her routine again. Prof extended deadline for big project, staying at library till it closes. Don't worry, Zora sighed, reading the message as she entered the gym. At least this time it wasn't an emergency. She decided to tackle the weight room first tonight, just to get it over with. As she pushed open the door, she wasn't entirely surprised to find Dorian there again. This time, he was fully dressed in expensive workout clothes, pounding a punching bag with focused intensity. He stopped when he noticed her, reaching out to steady the swinging bag. "Ms. Bennett," he acknowledged, slightly out of breath. "We meet again." "I can come back later," Zora offered, already backing toward the door. "No need." Dorian grabbed a towel from a nearby bench. "I've been here for hours. I should probably call it a night." As he wiped his face, Zora noticed the raw knuckles on his right hand. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "You should wrap your hands if you're going to hit that thing," she said, nodding toward the punching bag. Dorian glanced down at his reddened knuckles as if noticing them for the first time. "Forgot my wraps tonight." "There's a first aid kit." "In my cart," Zora said, then immediately questioned why she was offering to help the billionaire who owned an entire chain of health clubs. "I mean, I'm sure you have better—" "Thank you," Dorian cut in, surprising her. "That would be helpful." Zora retrieved the small white box from her cleaning cart and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. Dorian sat on a nearby bench and opened the kit, but as he tried to open an antiseptic wipe with one hand, Zora could see him struggling. "Let me," she said, taking the packet from him before she could second-guess herself. She tore it open and handed it back. "You've been cleaning up after me, haven't you?" Dorian asked suddenly, looking up at her. Zora blinked in confusion. "The weight room," he clarified. "I've been coming in late using the equipment, but when I return the next night, everything's spotless. That's you, isn't it?" "It's my job," Zora replied simply. Dorian's intense gaze held hers. "You do it well. I've been trying to clean up after myself to make your job easier, but apparently I'm not as thorough as you are. So that explained why the weight room had seemed cleaner recently." The thought of Dorian Vance, billionaire CEO, wiping down equipment and trying to tidy up for her benefit was so unexpected that Zora couldn't help but smile. "Cleaning's not as easy as it looks," she said, a hint of teasing in her voice. "Clearly not," Dorian agreed, a smile tugging at his own lips. "Maybe you could give me some pointers." The moment felt strangely intimate, standing there in the empty gym with this man she barely knew. Zora took a step back, reminding herself that no matter how human he seemed right now, Dorian Vance was still her boss, and from a world completely different from her own. "I should get back to work," she said, gesturing toward her abandoned cleaning cart. Dorian nodded, rising to his feet. "Of course. Don't let me keep you." As Zora turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Ms. Bennett." "Zora." She looked back at him. "Thank you," he said simply, "for the first aid and for not asking questions." Something in his tone made her curious. "Questions about what?" Dorian's expression shuddered slightly. "About why the owner of a fitness empire is working out alone at midnight instead of attending whatever charity gala is happening tonight." Zora shrugged. "Not my business. We all have our reasons for being where we are at midnight." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, I suppose we do." Over the next 2 weeks, their midnight encounters became almost routine. Zora would find Dorian in the weight room, sometimes with weights, sometimes on the treadmill, always pushing himself to the edge of exhaustion. They'd exchange brief words, never anything too personal, but more than the typical conversation between a billionaire CEO and a member of his cleaning staff. Zora learned that Dorian took his coffee black, that he spoke 3 languages, that he'd built his first gym with money he'd saved, working as a personal trainer in college. In turn, she told him about Marcus's engineering projects, about the community center where her brother volunteered teaching kids about science, about her own abandoned dreams of becoming a physical therapist. One night, she arrived to find Dorian, sitting motionless on a weight bench, staring at his phone. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. "Mr. Vance?" she ventured, concerned despite herself. "Are you all right?" He looked up, and for a moment, it was as if he didn't recognize her. Then he blinked, tucking the phone away. "Fine," he said curtly. "Just business." But Zora could see it was more than that. The haunted look had returned to his eyes deeper than before. "You don't look fine," she said bluntly. Dorian's eyebrows rose at her directness. Most people wouldn't tell their boss that. "Most people don't see their boss in gym shorts at midnight," Zora countered. That drew a reluctant smile from him. "Fair point." He was silent for a long moment, and Zora thought he wasn't going to say more. She was about to turn back to her cart when he spoke again. "My brother's coming back to New York," he said quietly. "I didn't know you had a brother," Zora replied, leaning against her cleaning cart. Dorian's laugh was hollow. "Not many people do. We're not close." "Family can be complicated," Zora offered, thinking of her own absent father. "Complicated," Dorian repeated the word as if testing it. "That's one way to put it." Another silence fell between them, but this one felt weighted with unspoken words. "He was in an accident," Dorian finally said, his voice so low Zora had to strain to hear it. 5 years ago. He's been in a rehabilitation center in Switzerland ever since." "I'm sorry," Zora said, meaning it. Dorian's gaze was fixed on some distant point. "He's paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors said he'd never walk again." Zora felt her heart twist. "That must have been hard for both of you." "It was my fault," Dorian said flatly. "We were racing cars. It was stupid, reckless. I was showing off. He took a curve too fast, trying to catch up to me, and..." He trailed off, but Zora could fill in the blanks. The weight of guilt in his voice was unmistakable. "And now he's coming back," Zora prompted gently when Dorian didn't continue. "Now he's coming back," Dorian confirmed, his expression grim. "And he still blames me. Not that I can blame him for that." Before Zora could respond, Dorian stood abruptly. "I should go. I've kept you from your work long enough." "It's fine," Zora assured him. "I'm ahead of schedule tonight." Dorian nodded distractedly, already moving toward the door. "Good night, Miss Bennett." "Good night, Mr. Vance," she replied, watching him go. As the door closed behind him, Zora found herself staring at the space where he'd been, wondering about the complicated man behind the billion-dollar brand. In just a few weeks, her perception of Dorian Vance had shifted dramatically. The cold, calculating businessman from magazine covers was also a man haunted by guilt, a man who cleaned gym equipment in the middle of the night to make a cleaner's job easier, a man who carried a burden heavier than she had imagined, and despite all her better judgment, Zora realized she was beginning to care. The following Monday, Zora arrived at work to find an envelope with her name on it, waiting at the security desk. Inside was a key card with a note in elegant handwriting. For after-hours access to the executive lounge, the coffee machine makes a decent espresso. DV Zora stared at the card, unsure what to make of this unexpected gesture. Was it simply a kindness from an employer who'd noticed her long hours? Or was it something more? Either way, as she tucked the card into her pocket, Zora couldn't ignore the warmth that spread through her chest, or the warning voice in the back of her mind reminding her that men like Dorian Vance weren't for women like her. Men with power and money had a way of taking what they wanted and leaving destruction in their wake. Her father had taught her that lesson all too well, but as she pushed her cleaning cart through the silent gym, Zora found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, Dorian Vance might be different, and whether she was brave enough to find out. The executive lounge of Elysium Fitness was a world away from the spaces Zora usually cleaned. Sleek leather couches, a fully stocked refrigerator, and the promised espresso machine that looked more complicated than her laptop. She hesitated in the doorway, the keycard Dorian had given her clutched in her hand. This wasn't part of her job. She should be cleaning the locker rooms right now, not standing in a space reserved for people who paid more for their monthly gym membership than she made in 2 months. But the coffee smelled amazing, and her second shift had started right after her day job ended. Exhaustion pulled at her bones. Just 1 cup, she told herself, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. The espresso machine hummed to life at the touch of a button. While it brewed, Zora's eyes wandered around the room, taking in framed magazine covers featuring Dorian Vance's stern face and impressive physique. The headlines praised his business acumen and fitness empire. Vance expands new locations set to revolutionize luxury fitness. 30 under 30, Dorian Vance builds billion-dollar brand. One photo caught her attention, newer than the others. Dorian at a ribbon-cutting ceremony surrounded by city officials. The caption read, "Elysium expansion approved for Upper West Side location." Zora frowned. The Upper West Side was where Marcus volunteered at the West Side Community Center, teaching science to neighborhood kids on weekends. She remembered him mentioning something about development threatening the center, but she'd been so busy with her jobs that she hadn't asked for details. The espresso machine beeped, pulling her attention away from the photo. She took her coffee to one of the plush couches, sinking into its softness with a sigh of relief. The quiet luxury of the room enveloped her, so different from the cramped apartment she shared with Marcus or the noisy break rooms at her other jobs. The door opened, and Dorian walked in, stopping short when he saw her. "You found the lounge," he said, surprise evident in his voice. Zora jumped to her feet, nearly spilling her coffee. "I'm sorry, I was just taking a coffee break." Dorian finished for her, his expression softening. "That's why I gave you the card." He crossed to the espresso machine and made his own drink, moving with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to having the world bend to his will. In jeans and a simple black t-shirt, he looked more approachable than the suited executive from the magazine covers, but no less powerful. "I don't usually take breaks during my shift," Zora said, still feeling awkward. "Everyone needs a break sometimes." Dorian sat in an armchair across from her. "Even workaholic cleaning staff?" "Says the man who works out at midnight," Zora countered with a small smile. Dorian acknowledged the hit with a tilt of his head. "Touché." A comfortable silence fell between them as they sipped their coffee. Zora found herself studying his face, noting the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "Your brother," she said finally. "Has he arrived in New York yet?" Surprise flickered across Dorian's features, as if he hadn't expected her to remember their conversation. "Tomorrow," he answered. "His flight gets in at noon." "You don't seem happy about it." Dorian's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Would you be happy to face someone whose life you ruined?" The bitterness in his voice made Zora's heart twist unexpectedly. Without thinking, she leaned forward. "My father walked out on us when Marcus was 14, she said quietly. "No warning, no goodbye, just emptied our bank account and disappeared with his new girlfriend. I was 20, just starting college with a scholarship." Dorian's gaze sharpened, focused entirely on her. "I dropped out to take care of Marcus," Zora continued. "Got 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. For years I was so angry at my father, I could barely breathe when I thought about him." "What changed?" Dorian asked. Zora considered the question. "Nothing, everything. I realized my anger was only hurting me. My father wasn't losing sleep over what he'd done, but I was." "So you forgave him?" Dorian's tone suggested he found the idea impossible. "No," Zora said firmly. "What he did was unforgivable. But I stopped letting it consume me. And I promised myself I'd never depend on anyone who could walk away." The last words came out more forcefully than she'd intended, and Zora felt heat rise to her cheeks. She hadn't meant to reveal so much of herself. "I'm sorry," Dorian said after a moment. "About your father." Zora shrugged, uncomfortable with his sympathy. "It was a long time ago." She gestured toward the framed magazine covers. "Your new gym location, it's on the Upper West Side." If Dorian was surprised by the change of subject, he didn't show it. "Yes. Construction starts next month. It's going to be our flagship location. Twice the size of this one, with innovative equipment and facilities not available anywhere else in the city." His voice took on a practiced quality, as if reciting from a press release, but Zora wasn't listening to his words. She was watching the photo on the wall, recognizing the street corner where the West Side Community Center stood. "What's happening? To the buildings that are already there?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "The usual urban renewal story," Dorian replied, waving a dismissive hand. "Some outdated structures, a few small businesses that were struggling anyway. The development will revitalize the whole block, including the community center." Zora's question came out sharper than she intended. Dorian's brow furrowed. "There's a community center in the development zone." "The West Side Community Center," Zora confirmed, watching his face closely. "My brother volunteers there. They have after-school programs for kids, senior activities, job training." Understanding dawned in Dorian's eyes. "I wasn't aware of the specifics. My development team handles those details." "So you didn't know your new gym is going to shut down a place that helps hundreds of people who can't afford your membership fees?" Zora couldn't keep the accusation from her voice. Dorian's expression hardened. "Business decisions are complex, Ms. Bennett. The development will create jobs and improve property values in the area." "For who?" Zora stood up, her break forgotten. "Not for the kids who have nowhere safe to go after school while their parents work. Not for the seniors who rely on the center's meal program. There are other facilities. Not in that neighborhood." Zora cut him off. "Not where people can actually reach them." Dorian rose to his feet as well, his imposing height making Zora tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. The comfortable atmosphere between them had evaporated, replaced by a tension that crackled like electricity. "I didn't realize you had such strong feelings about urban development," he said coolly. "And I didn't realize you were the kind of person who would displace a community without a second thought," Zora shot back. For a moment, they stared at each other, the gulf between, their worlds suddenly vast and unbridgeable. "I should get back to work," Zora said finally, placing her half-empty cup on the table with careful precision. "Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Vance." She walked out before he could respond, her heart pounding in her chest. The familiar weight of her cleaning cart under her hands was grounding, helping her push back the surge of disappointment. For a brief moment, she'd allowed herself to see Dorian Vance as more than just her wealthy boss, as a man with vulnerabilities and depth. But in the end, men like him always showed their true colors. Power and profit would always matter more than people. The next few nights, Zora adjusted her cleaning schedule to avoid the weight room during the hours Dorian usually appeared. She returned the key card to the executive lounge by leaving it at the security desk with a brief note. "Thank you for the loan." ZB, she told herself it was better this way. Whatever strange connection had been forming between them had been a mistake from the start. They belonged to different worlds, wanted different things. She had Marcus to think about, her plans, to save enough for them both to finish college properly. On Friday night, as she was finishing the women's locker room, her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Emergency meeting at community center tomorrow 10 a.m. They're being demolished for some fancy gym. Can you come?" Zora's stomach clenched, so it was official now. She typed back a quick reply. "I'll be there," as she pushed her cart toward the cardio area. The sound of raised voices from the direction of the weight room made her pause. One was unmistakably Dorian's, the other unfamiliar, but with a similar timbre. Another man, his voice laced with bitterness. "You think a few $1 million makes it all better," the stranger was saying, "that I can just forget what happened because you write a check." "That's not what I said, James." Dorian's voice was tight with controlled emotion. "I'm trying to help. The word came out as a harsh laugh. "Like you helped me 5 years ago? Racing through those mountain roads like you had something to prove?" Zora knew she should walk away. This was a private conversation, not meant for her ears. But something held her in place. Her breath caught in her throat. "I never meant for you to get hurt," Dorian said, his voice dropping to a level that Zora had to strain to hear. "I've regretted that night every day since." "Regret doesn't give me back my legs," the man, James, replied. "And it doesn't change what you're doing now. More empire building, more shiny temples to the great Dorian Vance, while the rest of us are just collateral damage." There was the sound of movement, and then the weight room door burst open. A man in a wheelchair propelled himself through. his face twisted with anger. He was handsome in the same sharp-featured way as Dorian, but thinner, with a hardness to his expression that spoke of years of pain. James stopped short when he saw Zora standing there, her cleaning cart between them like a flimsy barrier. Well, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. One of my brother's employees. Do you know what kind of man signs your paychecks? Before Zora could respond, Dorian appeared in the doorway behind James. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. Miss Bennet, he said stiffly. This is my brother, James Vance. James, this is Zora Bennet, a member of our cleaning staff. James's bitter smile didn't reach his eyes. Cleaning staff? How appropriate. My brother's very good at making messes for other people to clean up. Zora stood frozen, caught in the crossfire of years of pain and resentment between the two brothers. That's enough, James, Dorian said quietly. This isn't the place. No place ever is with you, James retorted, but he began wheeling himself toward the exit. We're not finished, Dorian. Not by a long shot. They watched in uncomfortable silence as James disappeared around the corner. Only when the sound of the elevator doors closing echoed through the empty gym did Dorian turn his attention back to Zora. I apologize for my brother, he said formally. He's going through a difficult time. 5 years seems like more than a difficult time, Zora replied before she could stop herself. Dorian's expression shuttered. You heard. Not intentionally, Zora assured him. I was just passing by. And formed your judgments accordingly, no doubt. The coldness in his voice stung more than Zora wanted to admit. I don't know enough to judge anyone, she said carefully. But I understand why he's angry. Do you? Dorian's eyes searched her face. You think I don't want to fix what happened? That I wouldn't trade places with him in a heartbeat if I could? I think guilt is a complicated thing, Zora said quietly. And so is forgiveness. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across Dorian's features. Then he straightened, his CEO mask sliding back into place. Well, thank you for your psychological insights, Miss Bennet, he said coolly. But my family situation is not your concern. The dismissal was clear, and it cut deeper than Zora cared to admit. She nodded stiffly, gripping her cleaning cart. Of course, Mr. Vance, good night. She walked away, her back straight, refusing to let him see how much his words had hurt. Whatever glimpses she'd had of the real man behind the billionaire facade had clearly been a mistake, one she wouldn't make again. The West Side Community Center was packed when Zora arrived the next morning. Concerned neighbors, parents with children in the after-school programs, seniors who relied on the center's services, all crowded into the main room where folding chairs had been hastily arranged in rows. Marcus waved to her from near the front, where he sat with a group of other young volunteers. Zora made her way to him, squeezing past worried-looking residents. It's bad, Marcus said as she sat down beside him. They've already filed all the permits. Demolition is scheduled to start in 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Zora echoed in disbelief. That's impossible. There has to be some kind of appeal process. Marcus shook his head grimly. The building was sold months ago. The owner kept it quiet until everything was finalized. Some big-shot fitness mogul bought the whole block for his new luxury gym. Zora's stomach clenched. Dorian Vance, she said softly. Marcus looked at her in surprise. Yeah, how did you know? Before she could answer, the community center director, Mrs. Washington, stepped up to the makeshift podium at the front of the room. A tall, dignified woman in her 60s, she'd run the center for over 20 years. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. As many of you have heard, the West Side Community Center has been sold, along with the rest of this block, to Vance Fitness Enterprises. We've been given notice to vacate within 3 weeks. A murmur of anger and distress rippled through the crowd. We're exploring all possible options, Mrs. Washington continued, raising her hands for quiet. Legal challenges, alternative locations, appeals to the city council. But I want to be honest with you, our resources are limited and time is not on our side. What about all the kids who depend on this place? A woman called from the back. My daughter comes here every day after school while I'm at work. Where is she supposed to go? Similar concerns erupted from around the room. Seniors worried about losing their meal program, teenagers who had found safety and purpose at the center, parents who relied on the affordable childcare. Sitting there, listening to the voices of real people whose lives would be upended by Dorian's expansion plans, Zora felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just about business decisions or profit margins. This was about community, about lives being disrupted because a billionaire wanted a bigger, better gym in a trendy neighborhood. When the meeting ended, Zora lingered, helping Mrs. Washington stack chairs and clean up. "Marcus says you've been volunteering here for years," Zora said to the older woman. "This place means a lot to the neighborhood." Mrs. Washington nodded, her eyes tired but determined. "We've helped thousands of kids over the years, given seniors a place to gather, provided job training, English classes, health screenings, all the things that turn a neighborhood into a community. And now it's just gone?" Zora couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "Money talks, my dear," Mrs. Washington said with a sad smile. "And Mr. Vance has a lot of it. The building owner couldn't resist the offer, and who can blame him? But the real cost isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in opportunities lost, connections broken." Zora thought of Dorian, of the haunted look in his eyes when he spoke of his brother, of the careful way he had cleaned the gym equipment to make her job easier. Was that the same man who could callously displace an entire community center? "Has anyone tried talking to him directly?" Zora asked. "To Dorian Vance?" Mrs. Washington's laugh was tired. "Men like that don't talk to people like us, honey. We've sent letters, made calls. His company sent back form responses about community investment and neighborhood improvement initiatives. Corporate speak for 'we don't care.'" Later, as Zora and Marcus walked home together, her brother's usually cheerful face was clouded with worry. "Those kids, Zoe," he said, shaking his head. "Some of them, this is the only safe place they have, the only place where someone believes in them." He kicked at a stone on the sidewalk. "And it's all being torn down for what? So rich people can have another place to take selfies while they pretend to work out." Zora squeezed his arm. "The community's not giving up yet," she reminded him. "There's still time to find a solution." But even as she said the words, she wondered if they were true. In her experience, the rich and powerful rarely changed their minds once they decided what they wanted. Still, as she prepared for her night shift at Elysium Fitness, Zora couldn't stop thinking about Dorian Vance, the man who worked out alone, at midnight, who carried the weight of his brother's paralysis, who had briefly let her see behind his carefully constructed mask. Was there still a chance he might listen? Or had she been fooling herself all along about who he really was? When Zora arrived at the gym that night, the lobby was unusually busy for that hour. Security guards she didn't recognize stood at attention near the entrance, and a sleek, black town car idled at the curb outside. "What's going on?" she asked Ted, the regular night security guard. "Big board meeting upstairs," Ted explained, checking her ID badge. "Mr. Vance and all the top executives. Something about the new development. Project?" Zora's heart skipped a beat. The Upper West Side expansion, the community center. "Are they still here?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Ted nodded toward the executive elevator. "Still going strong. These finance types, they never sleep." As Zora pushed her cleaning cart toward the locker rooms, an idea began to form in her mind. A reckless, probably foolish idea that could very well cost her this job. But the faces of the people at the community center meeting kept flashing through her thoughts. The worried parents, the anxious seniors, the kids who had found a haven there. Before she could talk herself out of it, Zora abandoned her cart and headed for the executive elevator. The key card Dorian had given her for the lounge, the one she'd returned, would also access the executive floor. But she'd given it back. Ted was busy checking in a late-night gym member, his back to her. Zora slipped behind the security desk and quickly scanned the drawer where spare key cards were kept. There, a small stack of executive access cards. Her heart pounding, she palmed one and walked casually to the elevator, praying Ted wouldn't turn around. The elevator doors opened smoothly, and Zora stepped inside, swiping the stolen card with trembling fingers. As the elevator ascended toward the executive floor, she tried to plan what she would say. How did you convince a billionaire to change his mind about a multi-million-dollar development? What could she possibly offer that would matter more than profit margins and business expansion? The doors opened onto a sleek hallway with glass-walled conference rooms. In the largest one at the end, Zora could see a group of men and women in expensive suits, gathered around a table where architectural models and blueprints were spread out. And at the head of the table stood Dorian Vance, pointing to something on one of the models, his expression focused and commanding. This was madness, Zora thought suddenly. She was a night cleaner, a college dropout with no power, no influence. What made her think she could change anything? Just as she was about to retreat to the elevator, Dorian looked up. Their eyes met through the glass wall, and Zora saw surprise, confusion, and something else flicker across his face. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the busy meeting continuing around Dorian while Zora stood frozen in the hallway, her heart in her throat. Then Dorian excused himself from the table and walked toward the conference room door, his eyes never leaving hers. The time for retreat was gone. Whatever happened next, Zora knew her midnight encounters with Dorian Vance would never be the same again. The conference room door opened, and Dorian stepped into the hallway, closing it firmly behind him. His expression was unreadable as he approached Zora. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice controlled and professional. "This is a restricted area. How did you get up here?" Zora lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I need to talk to you about the West Side Community Center." "This isn't the time or place for that discussion," Dorian replied, glancing back at the conference room where his executives were watching with curious expressions. "If you have concerns about your employment, this isn't about my job," Zora cut in. "It's about the 300 people who depend on that center. The kids, the seniors, the families who have nowhere else to go." Dorian's jaw tightened. "As I told you before, business decisions are complex. It's not just business," Zora insisted, taking a step closer to him. "These are real people with real lives that you're disrupting. Have you even visited the center? Have you seen what they do there?" For a moment, something flickered in Dorian's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or surprise at her boldness. Then his expression hardened again. "Ms. Bennett, I appreciate your passion, but you're overstepping. If you leave now, we can forget this happened. Otherwise, I'll have to call security." The threat hung in the air between them. Zora felt a wave of disappointment, so intense it nearly took her breath away. She'd been right all along. The glimpses of humanity she'd seen in him during their midnight encounters had been just that. Glimpses, not the true man. "You know what?" she said quietly. "I thought you were different. When you were alone at night, in that gym, pushing yourself past exhaustion, talking about your brother, I thought I saw someone who understood what it meant to care about something more than money or power." Dorian's expression flickered, his carefully constructed mask slipping for just a moment. "But I was wrong," Zora continued, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "You're exactly what I thought you were the first time I saw your face on a magazine cover. Just another rich man who thinks he can buy whatever he wants regardless of who gets hurt." She turned to leave, her heart pounding in her chest. She'd said her piece even if it meant losing her job. At least she'd tried. "Wait." Dorian's voice stopped her at the elevator. She turned back to face him, surprised by the conflict she saw in his expression. "Tomorrow," he said after a moment. "Meet me at the community center at 9 a.m. I'll hear what they have to say." Zora blinked in surprise. "Really?" "1 hour," Dorian clarified. "That's all I can spare, and I make no promises. I'll let Mrs. Washington—" "No," Zora said, unable to keep a small smile from her lips. It wasn't a victory, but it was something. "Thank you." Dorian nodded stiffly, already turning back toward the conference room. "And Miss Bennett?" "Yes, return the keycard you took to access this floor. I won't mention this incident to security, but don't push your luck." Zora felt heat rise to her cheeks as she placed the borrowed card on a nearby table. "Good night, Mr. Vance." As the elevator doors closed between them, Zora let out a shaky breath. She'd risked everything on a desperate gamble, and somehow it hadn't backfired completely. Whether anything would change remained to be seen, but at least Dorian had agreed to listen. It was more than she'd expected from a man like him. Miss Washington was skeptical when Zora called her that night. He actually agreed to come here, the older woman asked, disbelief clear in her voice. Dorian Vance himself, not some company representative. He said he'd give us an hour, Zora confirmed. I know it's not much, but it's a chance to make him see what he's destroying. I've dealt with developers before, Zora, Mrs. Washington warned. They come, they nod, they express concern, and then they do exactly what they plan to do all along. Maybe, Zora admitted, but what do we have to lose by trying? After a moment, Mrs. Washington sighed. All right, I'll call an emergency meeting of the board and some of our program leaders, 9 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you, Zora said, relief washing over her. And, if possible, could you not mention that I work for him? It might complicate things. Are your secrets safe with me, honey? Mrs. Washington assured her. But if you don't mind my asking, how exactly did you manage to get the attention of a billionaire CEO? Zora hesitated, unsure how to explain her strange midnight relationship with Dorian without it sounding inappropriate. Let's just say our paths crossed, she said finally, and I was in the right place at the right time to make him listen. The next morning, Zora arrived at the community center early. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with all the things she wanted Dorian to see and understand. She'd called in sick to her day job, something she never did, knowing this meeting was too important to miss. Marcus was already there, helping Mrs. Washington and the other staff prepare the main room. Colorful posters displaying the center's programs and achievements lined the walls, and photo collages showed smiling children, engaged seniors, and community events. You really think this will make a difference? Marcus asked, his voice low, as they arranged chairs in a circle. I don't know, Zora admitted, but we have to try. At precisely 9 a.m., a sleek black SUV pulled up outside the center. Dorian emerged, wearing an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than Zora made in 3 months. Behind him came a woman in a crisp pantsuit, clutching a tablet and looking efficiently professional. That's his assistant, Zora murmured to Mrs. Washington. I've seen her at the gym. Mrs. Washington squared her shoulders. Well, let's see what Mr. Vance has to say for himself. Dorian's eyes found Zora's immediately as he entered the center. If he was surprised to see her there, he didn't show it. His expression was neutral, businesslike. Nothing like the vulnerable man she'd encountered during their midnight conversations. Mr. Vance, Mrs. Washington stepped forward, extending her hand. I'm Eleanor Washington, the director of the West Side Community Center. Thank you for taking the time to visit us today. Ms. Washington, Dorian shook her hand firmly. This is my assistant, Rebecca Chen, as Ms. Bennett may have mentioned. I can only spare an hour this morning. Then we'll make the most of it, Mrs. Washington replied with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Please, come in. We've gathered some of our program leaders and community members to speak with you. The meeting began with formal introductions around the circle. Besides Mrs. Washington, there was the youth program director, the senior services coordinator, a local teacher who ran tutoring sessions at the center, and several community members whose lives had been touched by the center's work. Marcus introduced himself as a volunteer science instructor, his gaze steady as he met Dorian's eyes. I teach kids who might never get exposed to STEM otherwise, he said. Last year, 3 of my students won citywide science fair awards. 2 of them are now on track for college scholarships. Zora felt a surge of pride at her brother's confident presentation. He'd grown so much from the angry 14-year-old left behind by their father. As each person spoke, sharing stories of what the center meant to them, Zora watched Dorian closely. His expression remained professionally attentive, occasionally asking pertinent questions or making notes, but the wall between them, between him and everyone in the room, remained firmly in place until Javier, a 17-year-old who'd been coming to the center since he was 8, stepped forward. Before I found this place, I was headed for trouble, the teenager admitted, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. My mom works 2 jobs, so I was alone a lot. Started hanging with the wrong crowd, skipping school. Dorian's attention sharpened, something subtle changing in his posture. Mrs. Washington caught me tagging the side of the building one night. Javier continued with a small smile at the center director. Instead of calling the cops, she handed me a paintbrush and told me if I was going to paint on her walls, I should do it right. He gestured to a vibrant mural that covered one wall of the center, depicting neighborhood scenes in a style that blended street art with classical elements. "That was my first project here," Javier said proudly. "Now I teach art classes to the younger kids 3 days a week. Got a full scholarship to study graphic design at NYU next fall." For the first time, Dorian's professional mask slipped. He walked over to examine the mural more closely, his eyes tracing the intricate details. "You did this?" he asked, genuine admiration in his voice. Javier nodded, standing a little straighter under Dorian's attention. "It's extraordinary," Dorian said quietly. "You have remarkable talent." The moment hung in the air, a glimpse of the man Zora had come to know during their midnight conversations, the one capable of seeing beyond balance sheets and profit margins to the human reality before him. But then Rebecca, his assistant, cleared her throat discreetly. "Mr. Vance, we should be moving on to your 10:30 meeting with the investors." Just like that, the wall came back up. Dorian straightened, adjusting his suit jacket. "Thank you all for sharing your stories," he said formally. "I appreciate the work you're doing here." "And what about our future?" Mrs. Washington asked directly. "Does hearing these stories change anything about your plans for this site?" Dorian hesitated, his eyes flicking briefly to Zora before returning to Mrs. Washington. "Development projects of this scale involve complex contracts and commitments," he said carefully. "It's not as simple as changing course overnight." "So, that's a no," Marcus said, disappointment evident in his voice. "That's a I need to review the situation," Dorian corrected, his tone cooling. "As I said, these decisions aren't made lightly or reversed easily." The hope that had been building in the room deflated like a punctured balloon. Zora felt her heart sink as Dorian exchanged business cards with Mrs. Washington, making vague promises to be in touch and consider all options. It was exactly as Mrs. Washington had predicted. He had come, he had nodded, he had expressed concern, and nothing would change. As Dorian prepared to leave, his eyes found Zora's across the room. For a brief moment, something like regret flickered across his features. Then he nodded stiffly and walked out, his assistant trailing behind him. "Well," Mrs. Washington said after the door closed behind them, "at least we tried." But Zora wasn't ready to give up. She excused herself and hurried outside, catching Dorian just as he was about to step into his waiting SUV. "That's it?" she demanded, not caring that his assistant was watching with raised eyebrows. "You listen to all those stories, you see what this place means to people, and you just walk away." Dorian turned to face her, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Ms. Bennett, I agreed to come here and listen, which I've done. I don't owe you or anyone else an immediate decision. These people, I don't have time to wait for you to review the situation," Zora shot back. "In 3 weeks, their center will be rubble." "Rebecca," Dorian said, not taking his eyes off Zora, "wait for me in the car." His assistant hesitated, then nodded and slipped into the SUV, closing the door behind her. "What exactly do you expect me to do?" Dorian asked once they were alone, his voice low and intense. "Cancel a multi-million-dollar development that's been in the works for over a year? Break contracts with investors, builders, suppliers? Risk my company's reputation and financial stability? I expect you to do what's right," Zora replied simply. "To see that some things matter more than money." Dorian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's a luxury perspective, Zora. The kind people can afford when they've never had to worry about financial security." "Don't you dare," Zora said, her voice shaking with sudden anger. "Don't you dare suggest I don't understand financial insecurity. I've been supporting my brother since I was 20 years old. I worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. I know exactly what it means to make hard choices about money." Dorian had the grace to look chastened. "I apologize," he said after a moment. "That was unfair." "You're right, it was," Zora agreed, still bristling. "And it's not just about the money, is it? This is about you proving something to your board, to the business world, maybe even to your brother." Dorian's expression hardened at the mention of James. "Leave my brother out of this." "Why?" Zora challenged. "Isn't he part of why you push yourself so hard, why you're so determined to succeed at any cost?" "You don't know what you're talking about," Dorian said coldly. "Don't I? You feel guilty about his accident, so you bury yourself in work, in success, in building an empire. But no matter how big that empire gets, It won't change what happened to James. And destroying this community. Center won't fix whatever you're trying to prove to him, or to yourself. For a moment, Zora thought she'd gone too far. Dorian's face was rigid with anger, his eyes like ice. Then, unexpectedly, his expression crumpled, the carefully constructed mask falling away completely. "You have no idea," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "No idea what it's like to live with what I've done." The raw pain in his voice caught Zora off guard. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You're right," she said softly. "I don't know exactly what you're going through, but I do know that punishing yourself won't help your brother. And hurting other people definitely won't." Dorian looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up to her face. Something shifted in his eyes. A softening, a moment of connection that transcended their different worlds. "I need to go," he said finally, gently stepping back from her touch. "I have meetings all day." Zora nodded, letting her hand fall back to her side. "Will you at least think about what you saw here today? Really think about it." "I will," Dorian promised, and for once Zora believed him. "But I can't make any promises about the outcome." As his SUV pulled away from the curb, Zora watched it disappear around the corner, her emotions a tangled mess. She'd pushed him hard, maybe too hard. Had she ruined any chance of saving the center by making it personal? Or had she finally broken through the walls he'd built around himself? That night, Zora arrived at Elysium Fitness with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. After their confrontation that morning, she half expected to find her security badge deactivated, a pink slip waiting for her at the front desk. But Ted greeted her as usual, and her badge worked fine. As she began her cleaning routine, she found herself glancing frequently at the clock, wondering if Dorian would appear for his midnight workout as usual, or if their complicated relationship had finally reached its breaking point. At 11:45 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Where are you? Need to talk ASAP. Big news about the center." Zora's heart skipped a beat. She quickly texted back, "At work, what happened?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, "Too much to text. Can you call?" Zora glanced at the clock again. Her supervisor wouldn't be doing his rounds for another hour. She slipped into the empty locker room and dialed Marcus's number. "What's going on?" she asked as soon as he answered. "Mrs. Washington just called an emergency board meeting," Marcus said, excitement vibrating in his voice. "She got a call from Dorian Vance's office late this afternoon. They want to explore alternative arrangements for the development project." "What does that mean?" Zora asked, hardly daring to hope. "It means they're reconsidering the demolition," Marcus explained. "Oh, so they're sending over some fancy architect tomorrow to see if there's a way to incorporate the center into the new development, instead of tearing it down." Relief washed over Zora in a dizzying wave. That's amazing news." Mrs. Washington says not to celebrate yet, Marcus cautioned. "It could still fall through, but it's the first positive sign we've had." After they hung up, Zora leaned against the cool tile wall, trying to process what had happened. Had Dorian actually listened? Had her words made a difference? As if summoned by her thoughts, the locker room door swung open, and Dorian himself. She walked in. He stopped short when he saw her, surprise flickering across his features. "This is the women's locker room," Zora pointed out, trying to sound normal despite the butterflies suddenly taking flight in her stomach. "I was looking for you," Dorian replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Your cleaning cart was outside, but you weren't with it." "I had to take a call," Zora explained. "My brother." Dorian nodded, his eyes searching her face. "I assume he told you about the call from my office." "He did," Zora confirmed, studying Dorian's expression. "What made you change your mind?" Dorian was silent for a long moment, his gaze dropping to the floor. "After I left the center this morning, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about how building my empire won't change what happened to James." He looked back up at her, vulnerability clear in his eyes. "You were right. I've been trying to bury my guilt in success, in expansion, in proving myself, but it hasn't worked. It's never worked." Zora took a step closer to him, drawn by the raw honesty in his voice. "I called my development team from the car," Dorian continued, "told them to find a way to work around the community center. It won't be simple and it will cost more, but... He shrugged, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. Some things are worth more than money, right? The echo of her own words made Zora smile in return. Right. For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence. The tension that had existed between them transformed into something new, something fragile but real. Thank you, Zora said finally, for listening, for being willing to change your mind. I should be thanking you, Dorian replied quietly, for having the courage to challenge me. Not many people do that. I'm not most people, Zora said with a small smile. No, Dorian agreed, his eyes warm as they met hers. You're definitely not. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, with unspoken feelings that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Zora was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the way Dorian's gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. I should get back to work, she said softly, breaking the moment before it could deepen into something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Dorian nodded, taking a step back. Of course, I need to get changed for my workout anyway. As Zora moved past him toward the door, his voice stopped her. Zora, she turned back to face him. Yes? Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? He asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice that she'd never heard before. Not as your boss, just as me. The question caught her off guard. This was exactly what she'd been trying to avoid, the complication of personal feelings in an already complex situation. And yet, the thought of saying no made her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. I don't think that's a good idea, she said carefully. There's still a lot of imbalance between us. Disappointment flashed across Dorian's face, but he nodded in understanding. I respect that. The offer stands if you ever change your mind. Zora hesitated, then offered a compromise. I usually take my break around midnight. The executive lounge has good coffee. The smile that spread across Dorian's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Midnight coffee it is. As Zora pushed her cleaning cart through the quiet gym later that night, she couldn't stop a small smile from playing on her lips. The world was still complicated, the future uncertain. But something had shifted today in Dorian, in herself, in the careful distance she'd always maintained between herself and men with power. For the first time in years, she was allowing herself to hope that not all men were like her father. That some perhaps were capable of change, of growth, of putting others before themselves, and maybe, just maybe, Dorian Vance was one of them. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The community center buzzed with cautious optimism as architects and designers from Vance Enterprises measured spaces, drew up plans and consulted with Mrs. Washington about the center's needs. The new concept would integrate the center into the fitness complex, maintaining its independence while upgrading its facilities. Each night at midnight, Zora and Dorian met in the executive lounge for coffee. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond the careful boundaries they'd established before. Dorian told her about growing up with wealth, but little emotional connection, about the pressure to succeed that had driven him since childhood, about the racing accident that had changed his relationship with his brother forever. In turn, Zora shared stories of raising Marcus after their father left, of putting her own dreams on hold, of the determination that kept her going through exhaustion and hardship. You never talk about your mother, Dorian observed one night as they sat on the leather couches, coffee cups cradled in their hands. She died when I was 18, Zora replied quietly. Cancer. That's when my dad started changing, staying out, late, becoming distant. Looking back, I think he couldn't handle the grief, but at the time it just felt like abandonment. And then he actually left, Dorian said, his voice gentle. Zora nodded, staring into her coffee. With his 25-year-old girlfriend and most of our savings, classic midlife crisis, I guess, but it left Marcus and me scrambling to survive. Is that why you're so hesitant to pursue whatever this is between us? Dorian asked carefully. Because of your father. The directness of the question startled Zora. They'd been dancing around the growing attraction between them for days, neither quite willing to name it. Partly, she admitted after a moment. Men with power haven't exactly proven themselves trustworthy in my experience. "I'm not your father, Zora," Dorian said quietly. "I know that," she replied, meeting his gaze. "But you are my boss, and you do have the kind of power and wealth that makes any relationship complicated." Dorian set his coffee cup down, leaning forward. "What if I wasn't your boss?" Zora raised an eyebrow. "Are you firing me?" "No," he said with a small laugh. "But what if you worked somewhere else? Somewhere that didn't create this power imbalance between us?" "Like where?" Zora asked skeptically. "In case you haven't noticed, jobs aren't exactly falling from the sky these days." "The community center," Dorian suggested. "They're going to need a program director for the new health and wellness initiative that's part of the integrated development. Someone who understands fitness but also cares about the community. Someone like you." Zora stared at him in shock. "Are you serious?" "Completely," Dorian assured her. "Mrs. Washington mentioned they were starting to look for candidates. The position would come with a significant salary increase compared to what you're making now, and much better hours." "And you just happened to think of me for this job?" Zora asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. Dorian had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I may have mentioned your name to Mrs. Washington, but the decision would be entirely hers. I have no influence over the center's hiring practices. That was part of our agreement about the development." Zora sat back, trying to process this unexpected offer. It sounded almost too good to be true, a job that would allow her to help her community, earn a better living, maybe even finally go back to school part-time to finish her degree. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say you'll apply," Dorian urged. "That's all. If you get the job, it will be on your own merits." "And if I do get it?" Zora asked, meeting his eyes directly. "What then?" Dorian's gaze was steady, intense. "Then we can explore what this is between us without the complications of you working for me, on equal footing." The possibility hung in the air between them, tantalizing and terrifying. Zora had spent years protecting herself, building walls against disappointment and abandonment. Trusting Dorian, trusting any man with power, went against every survival instinct she'd developed. But the man sitting across from her wasn't just a billionaire CEO. He was also the man who worked out at midnight because he couldn't sleep, who had changed his business plans to save a community center, who looked at her as if she was something precious and rare. "I'll think about it," she promised, her voice soft. Dorian nodded, respecting her need for space. "That's all I ask, They parted ways that night. Zora felt herself standing on the edge of a precipice. Stepping forward meant risking her heart in a way she hadn't done in years. But staying where she was meant never knowing what might have been. And for the first time in a long time, the fear of missing out on something real felt stronger than the fear of being hurt. 3 days later, just as Zora was finishing her shift at the gym, her phone rang. It was Mrs. Washington. "I just wanted to let you know," the older woman said without preamble, "that the board was very impressed with your interview yesterday. The job is yours if you want it." Zora's heart leapt. "Really? But there must have been candidates with more experience." "Experience isn't everything," Mrs. Washington interrupted. "You have passion, intelligence, and a genuine connection to the community. That's what we need. Plus, you're already familiar with the fitness world, which is a bonus given our new partnership with Elysium." "I don't know what to say," Zora admitted, echoing her words to Dorian days earlier. "Say yes," Mrs. Washington urged. "We need you, Zora. And from what I can see, this could be good for you too." After they hung up, Zora sat on a bench in the empty locker room, overwhelmed by how quickly her life was changing. A new job, a new possibility with Dorian, a future that suddenly held more promise than struggle. She was still sitting there when her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Just heard from Mrs. W. Congrats on the new job. We're celebrating tonight." Zora smiled, typing back a quick thanks. She hadn't told Marcus about her developing feelings for Dorian, unsure how her protective brother would react to the idea of her dating a billionaire CEO, especially one whose company had nearly destroyed the community center. That was a conversation for another day. For now, she just wanted to savor the feeling of possibilities opening up before her. As she gathered her things to leave, a final text came through, this one from Dorian. "Heard the good news. No pressure. but my offer still stands. Dinner tomorrow? Zora hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. Then, with a deep breath, she typed her reply, yes, tomorrow, 7 p.m. As she hit send, a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying seemed to lift from her shoulders. The future was uncertain, the path forward unclear, but for the first time in years, Zora Bennett was allowing herself to hope that happy endings weren't just the stuff of fairy tales. Sometimes, they could happen to real people too, even a night cleaner and a billionaire who found each other in the quiet hours of midnight. The restaurant Dorian chose for their first official date was elegant without being intimidating. A small Italian place with white tablecloths and warm lighting, but no dress code or pretentiousness. Zora appreciated the thoughtfulness. He could have taken her somewhere flashy to impress her, but instead had chosen somewhere she might actually feel comfortable. She'd spent far too long deciding what to wear, finally settling on a simple black dress she'd bought years ago for a college interview. It was classic enough to still look current, and with the right jewelry, simple silver earrings borrowed from her neighbor, she hoped she looked put together without seeming like she was trying too hard. Dorian was waiting for her at the table, rising to his feet as she approached. His eyes widened slightly as he took her in, and Zora felt a rush of pleasure at his obvious appreciation. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, sliding into the seat he held for her. "This place is lovely." "It's one of my favorites," Dorian admitted, returning to his own chair. "The owner, Giuseppe, was one of my first clients when I was just starting out as a personal trainer. His wife's cooking is the reason I keep coming back." The mention of his early days reminded Zora that beneath the billionaire exterior was a man who had worked his way up, built something from nothing. It made him seem more approachable, more real. As they ordered and began to eat, their conversation flowed easily, free from the constraints that had limited them before. Dorian told her about his plans to reevaluate some of his company's other development projects, to ensure they weren't negatively impacting communities the way the Upper West Side expansion almost had. "You've changed my perspective," he admitted, his eyes serious as they met hers across the table. "Made me see that success doesn't have to come at the expense of others." "I'm glad," Zora replied, "but I think that perspective was already in you somewhere. It just needed someone to bring it out." Their evening continued, warm and intimate, full of shared laughter and moments of surprising connection. As Dorian drove her home later, Zora felt a sense of rightness that she hadn't experienced in years, but as they pulled up in front of her apartment building, modest compared to what Dorian was undoubtedly used to, a flash of doubt crossed her mind. Could two people from such different worlds really build something lasting? Dorian seemed to sense her hesitation. "What are you thinking?" he asked gently. "Just wondering if this can really work," Zora admitted. "You and me. We come from such different places. Maybe that's our strength," Dorian suggested. "We see the world from different angles. Together, we get a more complete picture." The simplicity of his answer made Zora smile. "When did you get so wise?" "Around the time a night cleaner confronted me in my executive meeting and made me question everything I thought I knew about business," he replied with a grin. As they said good night, a gentle kiss that held promise of more to come, Zora felt the last of her doubts beginning to fade. There would be challenges ahead, certainly, but for the first time in years she was ready to face them with an open heart. What neither of them noticed, as they were lost in their goodnight kiss, was the sleek black car parked across the street, or its occupant, watching them with cold, calculating eyes. James Vance had returned to New York with a score to settle, and his brother's newfound happiness had just given him the perfect leverage. The next 2 weeks were the happiest Zora could remember. Her new position at the Westside Community Center began immediately, with Mrs. Washington eager to have her. Input on the renovation plans. The salary was nearly double what she'd been making at her 2 cleaning jobs combined, and the hours, regular daytime shifts with weekends off, felt like a luxury after years of night work. Best of all was her blossoming relationship with Dorian. Free from the complications of being employee and employer, they were discovering each other anew. They had dinner together most evenings, sometimes at nice restaurants, but often at small neighborhood places Zora introduced him to. On weekends, They explored the city, Dorian showing her places she'd never been able to afford, Zora revealing hidden gems he'd never noticed in his privileged life. "I never thought I'd see Dorian Vance eating a hot dog from a street cart," Zora teased one Saturday as they walked through Central Park, Dorian gamely trying the classic New York snack. "It's actually not bad," he admitted with a grin. "Though I'm still not convinced about the sauerkraut." These moments of normalcy seemed to delight Dorian as much as they amused Zora. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he was experiencing the city not as a CEO being courted and catered to, but as an ordinary man with the woman he was. Falling for because they were falling for each other. Neither had said the words yet, but Zora could feel it happening, as unstoppable as the tide. When Dorian looked at her, the walls he'd built around himself came down completely, revealing a tenderness that took her breath away. Only one shadow darkened their newfound happiness, James. Dorian's brother had made no further contact since his angry confrontation at the gym, but his absence was a presence in itself, hovering over Dorian like a storm cloud. "Have you tried calling him?" Zora asked one evening as they sat on the small balcony of her apartment, sharing takeout Chinese food. Dorian sighed, setting down his chopsticks. "Several times. He doesn't answer." "Maybe he needs more time," Zora suggested gently. "It's been 5 years," Dorian replied, a familiar guilt darkening his expression. "I'm not sure more time will change anything." Zora reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "People can change, Dorian. Look at you." A small smile touched his lips. "Thanks to you." "No," Zora shook her head. "I just helped you see what was already there. You made the choice to change." Later that night, as Dorian was leaving, he pulled her into his arms for a lingering kiss. "I never thought I could feel this way," he murmured against her lips. "Like there's something in my life more important than success or money." Zora's heart swelled at his words. "There always was," she replied softly. "You just couldn't see it." As she watched his car disappear around the corner, Zora allowed herself to believe that perhaps her fears had been unfounded. Perhaps not all powerful men were like her father. Perhaps some could be trusted with her heart. The illusion of perfect happiness shattered 3 days later. Zora was in her new office at the community center, reviewing plans for the health and wellness program she'd be implementing after the renovation. When Mrs. Washington appeared in her doorway, her expression troubled. "There's someone here to see you," the older woman said. "He's rather insistent." Before Zora could ask who it was, James Vance wheeled himself into the office, his handsome face set, in hard lines that reminded her forcefully of Dorian at his most closed off. "Ms. Bennett," he said coolly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Mrs. Washington glanced between them uncertainly. "Should I stay?" "It's fine," Zora assured her, though her heart was racing. "Mr. Vance and I have met before." After Mrs. Washington left, closing the door behind her, Zora gestured to the empty chair across from her desk. "What can I do for you, James?" James maneuvered his wheelchair into position, his movements practiced and efficient. Up close, the resemblance to Dorian was even more striking. The same sharp cheekbones, the same penetrating eyes. But where? Dorian's gaze had softened when looking at her. James's remained cold and calculating. "I'll get right to the point," he said, his voice clipped. "I want you to stay away from my brother." Zora blinked, taken aback by his directness. "I think that's between Dorian and me." "Is it?" James leaned forward, his eyes never leaving her face. "What do you really want from him, Mrs. Bennett? His money, his influence, a step up from cleaning floors at night?" The accusation stung, but Zora kept her expression neutral. "I don't want anything from Dorian except his company." James's laugh was harsh and disbelieving. "Please, women like you don't date billionaires for their sparkling personalities." "Women like me," Zora repeated, anger beginning to simmer beneath her calm exterior. "You know exactly what I mean," James replied dismissively. "The night cleaner, who suddenly lands a cushy job and starts dating the CEO, it's not exactly subtle." Zora took a deep breath, reminding herself that this bitter man was speaking from his own pain. "I understand you're concerned about your brother, but you don't know me or what's between us. I know Dorian, James countered. I know he's driven by guilt over what happened to me. And I know he'd do anything to try to make up for it, including being manipulated by someone who knows exactly which buttons to push. The accusation was so far from the truth that Zora almost laughed, but the raw pain behind James's anger stopped her. Instead, she looked at him more carefully, seeing beyond the bitterness to the wounded man beneath. You really believe that's what's happening? She asked quietly. That I'm using Dorian's guilt to get what I want? Aren't you? James challenged. This community center that he suddenly decided to save instead of demolish. Quite a coincidence that you work here now, with a big promotion. I got this job after Dorian changed his plans, Zora corrected him, and I got it on my own merits. James waved away her words. The timing doesn't matter. The point is you've got him wrapped around your finger, playing the savior, trying to prove he's not the same selfish person who destroyed my life. There it was, the real issue. Not Zora, not the center, but the unresolved pain between the brothers. James, she said gently, I can't imagine what you've been through. And I know Dorian feels responsible, but punishing him forever won't change what happened, and it won't help you heal. Something flickered in James's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she wasn't fighting back more aggressively. You don't know anything about it, he said, but some of the venom had gone out of his voice. You're right, I don't, Zora agreed, but I do know what it's like to be angry at someone who hurt you. My father walked out on my brother and me when we needed him most. For years, that anger was all I had. It protected me, but it also isolated me. James was silent, his eyes fixed on a point just past her shoulder. Dorian loves you, Zora continued softly. I would do anything to change what happened, to take your place if he could. Well, he can't, James snapped, his hands tightening on the arms of his wheelchair, and no amount of charitable gestures or dating women from the wrong side of the tracks to prove he's changed will make a difference. Zora felt her patience wearing thin. Is that really what you think of your brother? That he's dating me as some kind of penance? Why else would Dorian Vance be with someone like you? James asked bluntly. The question hung in the air between them, and for a brief, painful moment, Zora wondered the same thing. Why would someone like Dorian, who could have anyone, choose her? But then she remembered the vulnerability in his eyes when he talked about his insomnia, the way he'd cleaned gym equipment to make her job easier, the genuine joy on his face when they'd walked through Central Park eating hot dogs. None of that had been for show. None of it had been about guilt. Because with me, he can just be himself, she said finally. Not the CEO, not the fitness mogul, not the guilty brother, just Dorian. Something shifted in James's expression, a crack in the armor of bitterness he'd worn for so long. You really care about him, he said, sounding almost surprised. I do, Zora confirmed, and I think deep down you do too. Otherwise you wouldn't be here trying to protect him. James looked away, his jaw tight. You have no idea what it's been like, he said after a moment, his voice low. Watching from the sidelines as he built his empire, became the golden boy of the business world. Everyone thinking he's so perfect, so successful. No one knowing what he did. He knows, Zora said quietly. He lives with it every day. That's punishment enough, don't you think? James didn't answer, but Zora could see the conflict in his eyes. Years of anger and resentment battling with the remains of brotherly love that had never completely died. I should go, he said finally, backing his wheelchair away from her desk. But this conversation isn't over, Ms. Bennett. As he reached the door, Zora called after him. James? He paused, looking back at her. He works out at midnight, she said. Every night at the Elysium Fitness on 67th Street, in case you ever want to talk to him directly, instead of going through me. A flicker of something, surprise, consideration, crossed James's face. Then he nodded once and wheeled himself out of her office. Zora sank back in her chair, her heart pounding. She knew she should call Dorian, warn him about James's visit, but something held her back. The brothers needed to work this out between themselves without her interference. And besides, a small insecure part of her wondered, was there any truth to what James had said? Was she just a project for Dorian, a way to prove he'd changed? The thought, once planted, was hard to dislodge. That evening, Zora cancelled her dinner, plans with Dorian claiming a headache. It wasn't entirely a lie. James's visit had left her with a pounding tension behind her eyes and a knot of doubt in her stomach that wouldn't ease. "Can I bring you anything?" Dorian asked, concern evident in his voice. "Soup, medicine?" "I just need to rest," Zora assured him, hating the small distance she could feel herself creating between them. "I'll call you tomorrow." But the next day brought more excuses, and the day after that. She threw herself into work at the center, avoiding Dorian's increasingly worried texts and calls. She told herself she needed time to think, to sort through the doubts James had raised. But in truth, she was doing what she'd always done when relationships got too real, too threatening. She was running. 5 days after James's visit, as Zora was locking up the center after a late meeting, her phone rang. It was Marcus. "Where are you?" he demanded without preamble. "Dorian's been calling me, worried sick about you. He thinks something's happened." Guilt washed over Zora. In her effort to protect herself, she hadn't considered how her sudden withdrawal would affect Dorian. "I'm fine," she said. "I've just been busy with work." "Bullshit," Marcus replied, unusually harsh. "I know you, Zoe. You're doing that thing where you push people away before they can hurt you, like you did with Mike in college and with that guy from your old job." Zora winced at the accuracy of his assessment. "It's complicated, Marcus." "Then uncomplicate it," her brother said firmly. "Talk to him. The guy's crazy about you, anyone can see that." After they hung up, Zora stood on the steps of the community center, staring up at the night sky, barely visible through the city lights. Marcus was right. She was falling back into old patterns, letting her fear of abandonment dictate her actions. But was that fear irrational? James's words kept echoing in her mind. Why else would Dorian Vance be with someone like you? With a heavy sigh, Zora began walking toward the subway. She needed to clear her head, to figure out what she really wanted and what she was willing to risk to get it. 3 days later, the final pieces of the community center puzzle fell into place. The revised development plans were officially approved, with the center not only preserved but expanded, with new facilities and programming that would serve even more neighborhood residents. A celebration was planned for that evening. Board, members, volunteers, community leaders, all gathering to toast their unexpected victory. Zora had invited Dorian, of course, but she'd done so through his assistant, maintaining the professional distance she'd established over the past week. As she helped set up for the event, arranging chairs and hanging a banner that read, "Anew, beginning for Westside," Mrs. Washington approached her with a concerned expression. "Are you going to tell me what's going on between you and Mr. Vance?" the older woman asked directly. "Or are we going to pretend I haven't noticed you avoiding him like the plague?" Zora sighed, setting down the stack of programs she'd been organizing. "It's complicated." "It always is," Mrs. Washington replied with a knowing smile. "But complications don't resolve themselves by being ignored." "His brother came to see me," Zora admitted after a moment. "Said some things that made me wonder if what Dorian feels for me is real, or just part of some redemption project." Mrs. Washington's eyebrows rose. "And you believed him? A man you barely know over the one you've been seeing every day?" Put that way, it did sound foolish, but the seeds of doubt once planted had grown roots that were hard to extract. "I don't know what to believe," Zora said honestly. "Dorian and I come from such different worlds. Sometimes I wonder if we're just fooling ourselves thinking it could work." Mrs. Washington studied her for a long moment, then patted her hand gently. "You know, my Harold was a bank executive when I met him. I was a teacher's aide making minimum wage. His family thought he was crazy to date me." "What happened?" Zora asked, curious despite herself. 52 years of marriage, that's what happened," Mrs. Washington replied with a soft smile. "Because what mattered wasn't where we came from, but where we were going together." The simple wisdom of her words struck Zora deeply. Where was she going? And did she want to go there alone or with Dorian by her side? Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number, but the message made her heart skip a beat. "This is James. Need to see you. Urgent. At Elysium. Fitness now." Concern flooded through her. Had something happened to Dorian? "I have to go," she told Mrs. Washington. "Family emergency. I'll be back for the celebration if I can." She grabbed her coat and hurried out, her mind racing with possibilities. Had James confronted Dorian? Were they fighting, or was something else wrong entirely? Elysium Fitness was quiet when Zora arrived, the late afternoon lull before the after-work crowd arrived. She found James waiting in the lobby, his expression uncharacteristically somber. "What's wrong?" she demanded. "Is Dorian okay?" "Physically, yes," James replied. "Otherwise—" He trailed off, gesturing for her to follow him to a quiet corner of the lobby. "I need to show you something," he said, pulling out his phone, "before my brother makes the biggest mistake of his life." He pulled up what looked like a news article and handed her the phone. The headline made her blood run cold. "Vance Enterprises facing financial crisis. Sources say CEO gambling company's future on risky community project." The article detailed how Dorian's decision to preserve the West Side Community Center had alienated key investors, causing stock prices to plummet and putting the entire company at risk. Anonymous sources suggested he was making emotional rather than rational business decisions, calling his leadership into question. "This is scheduled to run tomorrow morning," James said as Zora scrolled through the damning article. "Unless he abandons the community center project and returns to the original development plan." Zora looked up, shock and betrayal washing over her. "You're blackmailing him? Using his company against him?" "I'm saving him from himself," James corrected her. "And from you. This infatuation has clouded his judgment, put everything he's worked for at risk." "So this is what it's about?" Zora asked, anger replacing her initial shock. "You're not concerned about him at all. You just want to hurt him, to take away the company he built." James's expression hardened. "You have no idea what he took from me." "I know exactly what he took," Zora shot back. "But destroying his company won't give you back your legs, James. It will just make you both miserable." For a moment, doubt flickered across James's face. Then his jaw set stubbornly. "He has until midnight to decide, the community center or his company." "And me?" Zora asked quietly. "Where do I fit into this ultimatum?" James's laugh was hollow. "That's up to you. But if you care about him at all, you'll walk away. Let him focus on saving what's left of his business." As James wheeled himself toward the exit, Zora called after him. "Have you even asked him if the article is true? If the company is really in trouble?" James paused, not looking back. "It doesn't matter. The perception will be enough to cause real damage." After he left, Zora sank onto a nearby bench, her mind reeling. Should she warn Dorian, call his assistant? What would he choose faced with such an impossible decision? And what would it mean for them if he chose his company over the community center? Over her. The celebration at the community center was in full swing when Zora returned, but she couldn't focus on the happy faces around her. She kept checking her phone, half expecting a call from Dorian, a message, something to indicate he'd heard from James, but there was nothing. As the evening wore on, Mrs. Washington gave a touching speech about community resilience and unexpected allies. She called Zora to the front, praising her role in saving the center, but Dorian, who should have been there as the guest of honor, was conspicuously absent. "Has anyone heard from Mr. Vance?" Mrs. Washington asked discreetly as the event began. To wind down, Zora shook her head, worry gnawing at her stomach. His assistant said he had an emergency meeting and sent his regrets, but she knew the truth. Dorian was facing the ultimatum his brother had delivered, deciding between his company and the center, between his future and his past, between her and everything he'd built. By 10 o'clock, most of the guests had left. Zora volunteered to stay behind and clean up, needing the distraction of physical work to quiet her racing thoughts. "You don't have to do this alone," Marcus said, concern evident in his voice as he watched her stack chairs with mechanical precision. "I'm fine," she insisted, though they both knew it was a lie. "You go ahead. I won't be long." After Marcus reluctantly left, Zora moved through the empty rooms of the center, turning off lights, straightening furniture, gathering discarded plates and cups. The building felt different at night, quieter but full of echoes. Echoes of children laughing, Seniors sharing stories, volunteers planning events, echoes of a future that might never come to pass. As she reached the weight room, the newest addition to the center, Dorian's personal contribution to the renovation, plans. Zora paused. Light spilled from beneath the closed door, though she was certain she'd turned everything off. Pushing the door open cautiously, she froze at the sight before her. The room was empty of people, but on the central weight bench lay a single envelope with her name written on it in Dorian's distinctive handwriting. Beside it was a stack of official-looking papers, the top one bearing the heading, Demolition Cancellation, Final Approval. With trembling fingers, Zora picked up the envelope and tore it open. Inside was a simple note. Zora, some choices are harder than others. This one wasn't. The center stands whatever it costs me personally or professionally. I don't know why you've been avoiding me, but I can guess. My brother has always been good at finding people's weak spots. Whatever he said to you, please know. What I feel for you is real. It has nothing to do with guilt or redemption or proving something to the world. You saw me when no one else did. Not the CEO, not the success story, but the man underneath it all. The man who couldn't sleep, who carried too much guilt, who had forgotten what really mattered. You reminded me by the time you read this I'll be gone. Not because I want to leave, but because I need to deal with the consequences of my choice. James made sure there would be consequences, but know this, I would make the same choice again, 1,000 times over. Yours, Dorian. Zora sank onto the weight bench, the letter clutched in her hand, her vision blurring with tears. He had chosen the center over his company, chosen what was right over what was profitable, chosen her world over his. And then he had left. The realization hit her like a physical blow. After everything, after all they'd shared, he had walked away, without giving her the chance to stand beside him, to face whatever was coming together. Or had she pushed him away? Her withdrawal over the past week, her silence, her fear, had she given him the impression that she didn't want to be part of his life anymore? The thought was unbearable. With sudden clarity, Zora knew what she had to do. Grabbing her phone, she dialed Dorian's number, but it went straight to voicemail. His assistant's phone did the same. Where would he go? Not his penthouse. That would be the first place reporters would look if the story about the company's troubles broke. Not his office for the same reason. Then it hit her. The one place he went when he needed to be alone, to push himself past the point of thought and into exhaustion. The gym. His original gym, the first one he'd built, where it had all started. Gathering the papers and the letter, Zora rushed out of the center, hope and determination propelling her forward. She'd spent too many years letting fear dictate her choices, building walls to protect herself from pain. But in doing so, she'd also walled herself off from love. It was time to tear those walls down, once and for all. The original Elysium Fitness was smaller than the flagship location where Zora had worked, tucked away on a side street in a less fashionable part of the city. A sign on the door indicated it was closed for renovations, but Zora could see lights on inside. She knocked, then pressed her face to the glass, trying to see through the papered-over windows. Nothing. She knocked again, louder this time, calling Dorian's name. Just as she was about to give up, the door opened a crack. Not Dorian, but a young man in gym clothes who she recognized as one of the personal trainers from the main location. "We're closed," he said firmly. "I need to see Dorian," Zora replied, trying to peer past him. "Is he here?" The trainer's expression remained neutral. "I'm sorry, there's no one here by that name." But Zora had caught a glimpse of movement behind him, someone tall with familiar broad shoulders, disappearing around a corner. "Dorian," she called out, pushing against the door. "Please, I need to talk to you." The trainer blocked her firmly. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Tell him it's Zora," she insisted. "Please. Tell him I read his letter. Tell him I'm not running anymore." Something in her voice must have conveyed her desperation, because after a moment, the trainer's expression softened slightly. "Wait here," he said, closing the door but not locking it. Zora stood on the sidewalk, her heart pounding in her chest. What if Dorian refused to see her? What if it was too late? The door opened again, wider this time, and there he was. Dorian looked exhausted, with shadows under his eyes and tension in his jaw, but the sight of him still made Zora's heart skip a beat. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Neither should you," she countered. "You should be fighting for your company, not hiding away." A flicker of surprise crossed his features. "You know about that?" "James showed me the article he's threatening to publish," Zora explained, "about the company being in trouble because of the community center." Dorian's laugh was humorless. "Always efficient, my brother." "Is it true?" Zora asked, taking a step toward him. "Is the company really at risk?" Dorian hesitated, then stepped back, gesturing for her to come inside. Once the door was closed behind them, he led her to a small office at the back of the gym, dismissing the trainer with a nod. "The company will survive," he said once they were alone. "It won't be easy, and some investors are pulling out, but we're not on the brink of collapse the way James's article suggests." Relief washed over Zora. "Then why disappear? Why not fight back?" "Because I'm tired of fighting," Dorian admitted, sinking into a chair behind the desk. "With James, with the board, with myself. I made the right choice with the community center, but it made me realize how many wrong choices I've made over the years, all in the name of success." "So you're just giving up?" Zora asked, disbelief coloring her voice. "That doesn't sound like the Dorian Vance I know." "Maybe that Dorian Vance was just a facade," he replied wearily. "A mask I wore for so long I forgot it wasn't really me." Zora moved around the desk, kneeling beside his chair so he had to look at her. "I never believed the facade," she said softly. "I always saw you, the real you. That's why I fell in love with you." The words slipped out naturally, as if she'd been saying them all her life. Dorian's eyes widened, a mixture of hope and disbelief. In their depths. "You love me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Zora admitted, finally allowing herself to embrace the truth she'd been running from. "And it terrifies me, because loving someone means giving them the power to hurt you. But I'm tired of being afraid, tired of pushing away happiness because I'm scared it won't last." Dorian reached out, his hand cupping her cheek with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Why did you pull away this week? Was it James? Did he say something to you?" Zora nodded, leaning into his touch. "He made me doubt everything, you, me, us. Made me wonder if I was just part of some redemption project for you." "Zora," Dorian said, his voice thick with emotion, "you're not a project. You're the woman who saw me at my lowest and didn't look away. The woman who challenged me to be better, to see beyond myself. The woman I love more than I've ever loved anyone." Tears welled in Zora's eyes at his words. "Then don't walk away," she urged. "Not from your company and not from me. We face this together. James, the investors, all of it." Dorian pulled her into his arms, holding her close, as if afraid she might disappear. "Together," he repeated, the word a promise against her hair. They stayed like that for a long moment, the barriers between them finally gone, the walls Zora had built around her heart crumbling to dust. "What about James?" she asked finally, pulling back enough to see Dorian's face. "He's still planning to run that article tomorrow." A small smile touched Dorian's lips. "Actually, he's not." At Zora's questioning look, he continued, "He called me about an hour ago. Said he'd changed his mind, wouldn't explain why, just said he needed more time to think about everything." Understanding dawned on Zora. Despite his bitterness, despite his threats, James hadn't been able to go through with his plan to destroy his brother. Perhaps there was hope for the brothers yet. A long road ahead, certainly, but a possible path to reconciliation. "So what now?" she asked, her hands resting on Dorian's shoulders. "Now," he said, rising to his feet and pulling her up with him, "we go back to the community center. I missed the celebration, but I'd like to see what we saved together. And after that." Zora's voice was soft, hopeful. Dorian's eyes were warm as they met hers, full of promise and possibility. "After that, we build something new. Together." As they walked out of the gym hand in hand, Zora felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The future was uncertain, the challenges real, but for the first time since her father walked out, she wasn't facing them alone. She had found a man worth trusting, worth loving, worth fighting for. A man who had chosen her and the community she cared about over his own business interests. A man who saw her, truly saw her, and loved what he saw, and she had chosen him back, not despite his wealth and power, but because of the man he was beneath it all. The man who worked out at midnight because he couldn't sleep. The man who had the courage to change when he realized he was wrong. The man who loved her enough to walk away if that's what she needed. But walking away was the last thing either of them needed now. What they needed was exactly what they had found, in each other, in the quiet hours of midnight, in the honest confessions that had brought them together and would keep them together through whatever came next. A love strong enough to bridge their different worlds and build something new between them, something real, something lasting, something worth fighting for.